Welcome to Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt of the Marquardt Law Firm at marquardtlawfirm.com.
Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt, here helping you discover your legal issue blind spots by listening to me talk about the law on the radio. And today we're talking about older and vulnerable adults and whether you have a responsibility or a liability to report neglect, financial abuse, financial exploitation. So before the break, we were talking about someone who might be making bad decisions, but they haven't been declared to be incapacitated. Well, let's talk more about what types of situations might be leading you to think that maybe they do have a vulnerability, maybe they have an undiagnosed condition. Well, there are some signs to look for: loneliness, isolation, depression, urinary tract infections, vitamin deficiencies. The most obvious sign that somebody might be vulnerable is if they have been diagnosed already with dementia. Well, that could be Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's, frontotemporal, among others. Some bad decisions could be resulting from depression, diet, nutritional deficiencies, vitamin B12 deficiency, chronic alcohol or drug abuse, sedatives, opioids, narcotics, anti-anxiety drugs, muscle relaxants. So look for those things in the medicine cabinet if you are concerned about an older person in your life. Another thing to watch out for are unsafe living conditions. If you visit with your customers or clients at their home, or if you just visit your family members, you might look for some of these clues that something might be going on. Just reminding you, I'm Todd Marquardt. This is Talk Law Radio on 9:30 a.m. The Answer. Also, we're on Facebook Live, so if you have a question, you can post a comment in the live stream on Facebook Live, or you can email me at host@talklawradio.com. That's HOST@talklawradio.com. Of course, you can call the station today, Saturday, August 6th at 210-308-8867. Happy to talk to you live on the air. What are some clues that somebody might be self-neglect, living in unsafe conditions? Well, let's define what neglect is first. The law defines it as the failure to provide the goods or services, including medical services, which are necessary to avoid physical, emotional harm or pain. It's also defined as the failure to provide for oneself the goods or services which are necessary to avoid physical harm, mental anguish, or mental illness, or the failure of a caretaker to provide such goods or services. So some signs of neglect could be malnourishment, dehydration, over-medication, under-medicated, lack of heat, running water, electricity. If the air conditioner is not working, if it's too hot in the house, you probably want to ask about that. Unsanitary living conditions, if they're not going to the doctor like they should, if they're not clean, if they're not wearing the appropriate clothing. Injuries, that's a big sign that there might be self-neglect, so you want to ask about that. Bruises, cuts, burns, welts, dehydration. If they look like they're a different color, if they're yellow or blue or, just not their normal color. Check out their bedroom. See if the clothing and the bed is soiled. I always would look in the pantry to see if there was food. See if there's food in the refrigerator and the freezer. If there's not, that could be a sign of self-neglect. Some other signs are behavior. A behavior of fear, anxiousness, agitation, anger, isolation, withdrawal. Now, some people are already naturally this way. They're naturally angry, or they're naturally anxious. So you want to look for more than just one sign. A caregiver might be neglecting if they prevent other people from seeing the older or vulnerable person. If the caregiver becomes angry, indifferent, or aggressive towards the elder person. If there's a history of substance abuse or mental illness, criminal behavior, or family violence, you might be more concerned. If there's a lack of affection toward their care receiver. If the relationship seems weird because of flirtation, you might be concerned about that. It's a real concern, so don't discount it just because that would be out of the ordinary. Conflicts of accounts, of incidents, of what's going on. Somebody withholds affection of their loved one as a caretaker. So those are things you could look for as a family member or as a business owner. Remember, this is everyone's duty, and I'll talk about the law that requires us to report neglect and abuse. So today's episode is about everyone's duty to older and vulnerable persons. The hidden legal issue blind spot is whether you are responsible or liable for reporting abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation of older and vulnerable adults. Failure to report might be a crime or lead to financial damages. Call us if you have questions about this at 210-308-8867 or post a comment on the Facebook live stream or email me at host@talklawradio.com. So we talked about some unsafe living conditions that might give you some concern that you need to report. So let's talk about the requirement that requires reporting. So in the Human Resources Code, this applies to business people in Texas, employers and employees. The legislature set up in Chapter 48 the authority of Adult Protective Services to investigate abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an elderly person or a person with a disability and to provide protective services for that person. I said it before, I'll say it again. Elderly person includes a person who is 65 years of age or older. Abuse means negligent or willful infliction of injury, unreasonable confinement, intimidation, cruel punishment, resulting physical or emotional harm or pain to an elderly person or person with a disability by the person's caretaker, family member, or individual who has an ongoing relationship. It's also sexual abuse of an elderly person or person with disability, including involuntary or non-consensual sexual conduct that constitutes an offense. We'll talk about exploitation. Financial exploitation means the illegal or improper act or process of a caretaker, family member, or individual who has an ongoing relationship with an elderly person or a person with a disability that involves using or attempting to use the resources of the elderly person or person with a disability, including the person's social security number, other identifying information for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain without the informed consent of the person. So we'll go back to what we were talking about in the first segment, which was a capable adult, a healthy adult, an adult who is living their best life but is not making good decisions. As long as they have the capacity to give informed consent, they can give other people money. So when somebody comes into my office, I always ask them, is there some physical or medical problem that's causing the person to make bad decisions? And oftentimes I hear, oh no, he or she is fine. It's just not a good idea. It's a bad decision. Well, in the United States, we have the freedom to make bad decisions. So I think I already defined neglect. So let's move on to where is the requirement that we report this. Okay, so in the Human Resources Code, there is a requirement in Section 48.051 to report abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. A person having cause to believe that an elderly person, a person with a disability, is in the state of abuse, neglect, or exploitation shall report that information immediately to Adult Protective Services. The duty imposed by this section applies without exception to a person whose knowledge concerning possible abuse, neglect, or exploitation is obtained during the scope of the person's employment or whose professional communications are generally confidential, including an attorney, clergy member, medical practitioner, social worker, employee, or member of a board that licenses or certifies a professional and mental health professional. So even if your professional licensing requires you to keep communications confidential, if you learn that somebody is being abused, neglected, or financially exploited, you have a duty to report that to Adult Protective Services. And if you don't, there's going to be a penalty. Section 48.052 says the failure to report, a person commits an offense if the person has cause to believe that an elderly person or a person with a disability has been abused, neglected, or exploited, or is in the state of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, and knowingly fails to report in accordance with this chapter. An offense under this subsection is a Class A misdemeanor, except sometimes it's a jail felony if it's known that the offense occurred to a person with an intellectual disability who resided in a state-supported living center. So you heard it here. This could be a hidden legal issue blind spot. If you didn't know before, now you know that you have a duty, along with everybody else in this state, to report abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation of an elderly, disabled, or other vulnerable adult. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about more signs that you need to report self-neglect. The number one thing we'll be addressing is hoarding and hoarding of animals. So stay tuned.
This has been Talk Law Radio with attorney Todd Marquardt, brought to you by the Marquardt Law Firm. You can learn more at marquardtlawfirm.com. And be sure to listen to the full Talk Law Radio show Saturday mornings at 11 on 9:30 a.m. The Answer.